Now I ain't the type for them hyphy dances. It might be tight with the right circumstances, but most of the time I be chillin' at the lab. Grab my pen and pad, mastermind another track. I don't lean like a Tolo, I walk like a G. House shoes on, fresh jeans, white tee, I might be all up in the limelight. Shorty says she love me cause I'm G'd up and I rhyme tight. Ain't no need for stunner shades, I love the sunshine. It's California living's keeping money on my mind. Time to unwind, someone rolling up a bad one. Watch. And I love women like I love living.
This mass suicide adhered to the Mayan calendar, which predicts the end of time to occur on the 21st of
The Clean Air Act of 1917 is seen as one of the most wide-ranging air pollution control bills in America. It was a response to a massive call for action by the public. It became possible under a strong bipartisan effort in Congress, and the results were outstanding. It was time to place guaranteeing clean air for everyone on the front door of our nation's pension. What was this act? How was it enacted? And most importantly, what can we learn from it? The popular environmental movement in the 1960s, when scientist and writer Rachel Carson published Silent Spring in 1962. The controversy of the book and a handful of other high-profile events during the time led to a sudden public awareness in environmental issues. On April 22, 1970, 20 million mobilized in a nationwide demonstration of environmental problems. The enactment of 1970 Clean Air Act, or 1970 CAA, resulted in a major shift of the federal government regarding air pollution control. The legislation authorized the development of federal and state regulations aimed at limiting emissions from both industrial and automobile sources. 4 regulatory programs regarding industrial or stationary sources were initiated: the National Ambient Air Quality Standards, State Implementation Plans, New Source Performance Standards, and the National Emission Standards for Hazardous Air Pollutants. Also, the executive side was also expanded. In parallel development was the National Environmental Policy Act that established the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, or the EPA. The EPA was created on December 2, 1970, in order to enforce all these acts. The Clean Air Act and EPA played a major role even now. Despite the initial resistance met by businesses and large corporations, the Clean Air Act of 1970 would serve as a model for future CAA amendments and future legislations. The EPA projects that the Clean Air Act and their amendments would have prevented over 230,000 early deaths in 2020. Everything from reduced smog emissions to safer and cleaner smokestacks that soar high above our cities are a result of the Clean Air Act.
Now, in a desperate attempt to fill in 20 minutes of our government project, here's some that has been happening recently in our environment. 3 super hot issues that will be touched on this evening will include reducing emissions, nuclear waste, and offshore drilling/oil dependency. The EPA has set up new standards for stationary emissions, emissions from power plants, oil refineries, and other large industrial facilities. On January 2, 2011, these facilities had to apply and secure state permits to release global warming emissions. These permits will require the facility to use the best available technology in order to reduce emissions by federal law. The government is once again in a deadlock on governmental policies. After President Obama killed a proposed repository in Nevada, federal appeals have been made to order the Nuclear Regulatory Commission to restart a licensing hearing to rule on whether the Nevada site, Yucca Mountain, is suitable. However, nothing has been done regarding the regulation of nuclear waste due to the Nuclear Regulatory Commission's lack of money. The Obama administration has given us another piece of fat to chew on. A newly proposed 5-year plan for offshore oil drilling calls for opening new drilling sites in the Gulf of Mexico and Alaska, with large development along the east and west coasts. Of course, the tree huggers are mad about this, but the most important part of all is that Congress feels that it just doesn't cut it. We will bring you further news on this.
Another response to the tremendous outcry on the subject of pollution was the Clean Water Act. The Clean Water Act is the primary federal law in the United States that governs water pollution. It was passed in 1972, and its goals was to eliminate the high release of toxic substances into water and ensuring surface water would meet standards for human sports and recreation. The body of the law was based on the Federal Water Pollution Control Amendments of 1972 and was expanded from the Federal Control Amendments of 1948. The Clean Water Act introduced the National Pollutant Discharge and Elimination System, which is a permanent system for regulating point sources of pollution, such as industrial facilities, government facilities, and agricultural facilities. The 1972 CWA created a new requirement for technology-based standards for point source discharges. EPA develops these standards for categories of discharges based on the performance of pollution control technologies without regard to conditions of particular receiving water body. The intent of Congress was to create a level playing field by establishing a basic national discharge standard for all facilities within a category using a best available technology. Agricultural stormwater discharges and irrigation return flows were specifically exempted from permit requirements. Congress, however, provided support for research, technical and financial assistance programs at the U.S. Department of Agriculture to improve runoff management practices on farms. Stormwater runoff from industrial sources, government storm drains, and other sources were not specifically addressed in the 1972 law. EPA declined to include urban runoff and industrial stormwater discharges in the NPDES program, and consequently was sued by an environmental group. The courts ruled that stormwater discharges must be covered by a permit program. A growing body of water research during the late 1970s and 80s indicated that stormwater runoff was a significant cause of water quality impairment in many parts of the U.S. In the early 1980s, EPA conducted a nationwide urban runoff program to document the extent of the urban stormwater problem. The agency began to develop regulations for stormwater permit coverage, but encountered resistance from industry and government facilities, and there were additional rounds of litigation. This litigation was pending when Congress considered further amendments to the Act in 1986. In the Water Quality Act of 1987, Congress responded to the stormwater problem by requiring industrial stormwater dischargers and municipal separate storm sewer systems obtain NPDES permits by specific deadlines. The permit exemption for agricultural discharges continued, but Congress created a non-point source pollution demonstration grant program at EPA to expand the research and development of non-point controls and management practices. Congress created a major public works for financing program for municipal sewage treatment in 1972 CWA. A system of grants for construction of municipal sewage treatment plants was authorized and funded. In the initial program, the federal portion of each grant was up to 75% of facilities' capital cost, with the remainder financed by the state. In subsequent amendments, Congress reduced the federal portion of the grants, and in 1987, WQA transitioned to a revolving loan program. Industrial and other private facilities are required to finance their own treatment improvements on the polluter pays principle.